This video is going to cover the basics of how to fly a brake and final turn, as well as the run through of the mechanics for the landing and touch and go. While some of the ground references in this pattern are specific to runway 17 left advance, many if not all of the mechanics as well as the runway references are universal, so don't get too caught up in the fact that there is no water tower for initial at runway 35. We'll run through the pattern breaking down each step during pauses in the video, followed by a full speed run through at the end. If you look straight ahead, you should see that you're aligned with runway 17 left advance. To your left, just in front of the wing, is the water tower used in Eastside's pattern as the initial point.
Dragon 6-3, initial.
As you approach the field, you'll see Vance's water tower start to appear near the center of the airfield. The water tower is considered the end of a normal 3,000-foot break zone for either pattern. When you roll into the brake, a few things have to happen simultaneously, namely reduce power, roll, and pull.
Dragon 6-3 into brake.
You should initially roll into 60 degrees of bank, then begin to vary that bank as required in order to roll out on your desired ground track. Reduce your power to about 10%. If the power is reduced below about 20%, the landing gear handle and 3 red gear lights will illuminate. That'll tell you you're pretty close. You'll have to add backstick pressure proportional to the amount of bank you're using in order to fly your brake turn. Trimming is going to be required to reduce that backstick pressure, which will help you maintain level flight. The ideal spacing for a normal 1,000-foot pattern in the T6 is often touted as roughly 3/4 of a mile offset from the runway, but conditions at Vance are rarely ideal. Using ground references to adjust your spacing helps compensate for winds tremendously. On the left hash mark at the north end of all those houses are a pair of roads which work well as a ground reference for a tighter pattern. On the right hash mark is Highway 81, which is pretty much the widest your inside downwind ground track should ever be. When your airspeed is below 150 knots, call out airspeed, gear clear. After getting a clear response from your instructor, drop the gear handle to the down position and put the flap lever to the desired configuration. Then add power to compensate for the drag on the aircraft. As the flaps lower, the increase in lift will cause the aircraft to balloon slightly. You'll need to trim forward a few clicks to prevent from getting high prior to the perch. After the configuration sequence, call out handle down, 3 green, flaps blank. All of those are conditionals, so if those conditions aren't met, don't call them out. You can make it easy on yourself by reading the gear and the flap position indicators. If you're unable to do this prior to an appropriate perch point, break out. You can check your spacing using the runway and your wing as a reference. This pattern happens to be a no-flap pattern, which is generally flown with the runway on the wingtip when you're flying at 1,000 feet. However, the winds in the pattern today are roughly 200 at 10 gusting 15. Those winds are blowing the aircraft away from the runway, so the pattern is flown intentionally tighter to compensate. When you get to your perch point, a few things need to happen simultaneously. Pitch the nose down slightly by relaxing backstick pressure, reduce your power to an appropriate setting, and roll to 30 degrees of bank. It's a good idea to check your power again, then periodically throughout this phase of flight, since control inputs require a great deal of finesse to hit what you're aiming for. The important thing with power is to fly for performance. The 248 numbers are good for some arbitrary weight on an average standard day, so if they're not working, don't keep using them. On a standard day, your perch should occur when your intended point of landing is about 45 degrees off your inside shoulder. Today, with the stronger than normal headwinds, we're perching early to prevent getting blown past Roop Road and extending the pattern. There are some references on the screen, and one more will pop up in a second. The closest to the wingtip is the fork in the taxiway going to runway 17 center. This fork can be used as a reference for a tighter half-mile final on a standard day. The circled area next to 17 center is the run-up area. The run-up area can be used for closer to a 3/4 mile final on a standard day. The last circled reference is the halfway house, which serves 2 purposes. The first is that it's essentially parallel to the run-up area for runway 17 center, meaning that it can work for a 3/4 mile final. The second is that you'll be perpendicular to it about halfway through the final turn, so you can check that you've made it halfway down when you're halfway around.
Dragon 6-3, base gear down, no flap.
One way you can check your glide slope through the final turn is to take a mental picture of the runway and extend the center line out towards infinity. This technique might change slightly from student to student based on sitting height, but generally speaking, when in 30 degrees of bank with the appropriate perch point and flaps in the takeoff position, a 3-degree glide slope will cause that extended runway centerline to cross through your inside mirror about halfway between the top and bottom. A landing flap pattern will cause that extended centerline to cross closer to the top third of the mirror. And a no-flap pattern, like the one we're doing now, will cause the extended centerline to cross closer to the bottom third of the mirror.
Dragon 6317 left, 100, 013, guess 100, clear touch and go.
Dragon 63.
As you start to roll out on final, reduce your power to about 10%. This is to compensate for your lift vector now being completely vertical relative to the aircraft. If you don't reduce your power, and you maintain the same aim point, you'll probably get fast. If you shift your aim point or maintain the same airspeed, you'll probably end up high. For a normal 3-degree glide slope on final and flaps in the up position, your aim point should roughly fall in the bottom third of your windscreen. For a takeoff flap pattern, it should fall about in the middle third of the windscreen. And for a landing flap pattern, it should fall in the top third of your windscreen. As your aim point begins to track underneath your nose, start to ease the power back, shift your eyes to the end of the runway, and begin to add some backstick pressure in order to round out. Slowly bring the power to idle as the nose approaches parallel to the runway. Then continue to ease the stick back and try and hold the aircraft off. As airspeed slowly depletes, it will settle to the runway. The 11248 recommends being at idle at touchdown. However, if power is required to maintain centerline or compensate for gusty wind conditions, use it. If you are full stopping, once you touch down, just set idle. If you're doing a touch and go, set max as soon as the aircraft touches down. Attempt to maintain the landing attitude throughout. If you maintain your attitude, the aircraft should fly itself off the runway as airspeed increases. Don't try and force the aircraft off the runway. Doing so could cause an early rotation and subsequently a tail strike. Rotate to put the spinner on the horizon, or 7 to 10 degrees nose high, and confirm that the aircraft is climbing, good engine, gear clear. Wait for a clear call from your instructor before raising the gear and flaps. While they're in transition, maintain your attitude but do not climb above 1,800 feet. When the gear is up, the flaps are up, and the lights are out, you can call gear up, flaps up, lights out, and your airspeed. Your instructor should confirm this with you. Alright, so now we're going to run through the pattern again in real time, sans the instruction. You'll hear all the normal radio calls and see the effects highlighting various things, as well as guiding your eyes around the cockpit to simulate a cross-check.
Dragon 63, initial. Dragon 63 into brake. Dragon 63, base gear down, no flap.
Dragon 6317 left, 100, 013, guess 100, clear touch and go.
Dragon 63.